Yep. Hi, Paul. How's it going?
Good. You?
Good.
Okay, we're gonna roll on again here. A short session on bridge utilities. I'm gonna send the sign-up sheet around here. I think everybody is here. So this is less than half an hour talking about bridge utilities, and I think everybody knows what utilities are. But it can carry all kinds of stuff, and it can mean private, cooperatively owned, public. It can be communication lines, and it can be piping for oil, or gas, or water, all kinds of stuff. Sometimes utilities are carried on bridges, especially when you get into some of the electronic things, the conduits for lighting and things like that. So we will be talking about how you put utilities in and what we have to do to accommodate utilities. So the definitions might be dependent a little bit on what the context is. It might be utility company and whatever. But again, it's something that's putting transmitting something across, in our case, a bridge. So 1507 in the spec book talks about utility, property, and service. Page 41 of the smaller spec book, the one that has division 1 and division 3. So that's where we find it, page 41, utility, property, and service. So we are inspectors and or engineers on projects, and we have certain responsibilities, and that's what this is saying. We want to assure that the plans are properly provided for the utility, or things that are on our bridge properly put in, and all the parties understand what's going on. We want to make sure operations are coordinated. And if we, as the owner, happen to be paying for it, we want to make sure that the work is done and paying accordingly. Sometimes it's the utility is responsible, and so we really don't have to track what they're doing. Certainly want to make sure that things are done accurately. And so we're just making sure the state's interests are protected, equitable payments, and so forth. So there's a statement here, the state can't pay for any costs which the federal government will not reimburse the state. So just want to make sure of what the responsibilities are, who's going to pay for what. And so thus it's required that the state and utility agree in writing on their responsibility. That's called the utility agreement. And it should have a detailed estimate of costs, detailed plans, and specifications. This stuff hopefully will be all done before our project. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But the agreements are written. It's between the state and the utility, in every case where reimbursement is involved. And the representatives of each party understand their scope and what they're doing. And so down at the bottom here, you as the inspector, you as the engineer will want to know what are any utility agreements. So the utility companies are responsible to relocate so that we can build our project. And utility companies may be held responsible for damage incurred by the contractor. So there's many instances, I'm sure all of you have worked in the field, you've come across times when utilities can't get approved, all of a sudden there's a delay, now we got to pay the contractor to delay. And like on St. Croix, it's a multi-million-dollar, at the end of the day, it's almost $500 million. But early on, we were delayed by Excel not moving a certain line. And it ended up causing delay from the first part of the project, which the contractor then said it delays everything. And you're battling that right from day one. And so really we would hope that all of the things that are required to be relocated would be relocated in a timely manner. In the case of St. Croix, Excel owned all of the property. There's railroad tracks going under there that fed the coal burning power plant, overhead line. They had everything. And so MnDOT essentially owned air rights for a bridge to go over Excel property. So as far as was the utility company responsible? No, because ultimately we needed their airspace to go through with our bridge. So, we ended up eating a big portion of that. So what's the project engineer responsible for? They're responsible to see that inspection is provided for all utility relocation and installs. So there are responsibilities, even though, yes, it's a utility agreement, but let's make sure that these things get done properly. And so the inspection then is dependent on what's going to happen, what's the nature, location of work, and even what's its impact on the completed highway construction. And so then the degree of where you guys as inspectors get out there and inspect on a bridge is dependent partly then, is it spot checking or is it close observation? Are we paying or are we just lump sum, or what kind of things do we need to do? When something is on a bridge and we're constructing it, so a conduit and a rail, a conduit and a deck, things like that, obviously we want to make sure, and we're, that's part of the contract, we're putting a new utility on there. But the utility relocates and deals with it. So when we have a relocate, the utility agreements unit for MnDOT aims to get that stuff done, get the agreement done so that we can move ahead. Again, as I mentioned, that's not always done properly, and we need to work through it. And you as inspectors should verify the info in those utility agreements and in the plans as a condition of existing utilities before any relocation work. So sometimes, we do our best effort to locate utilities, and the utilities are located with a certain amount of precision. I think usually it says it's type D, or it's A, B, C, and D, and D is kind of the lowest, that they don't know exactly where the utility is, but it's somewhere in this vicinity, and the contractor has to verify. So the final inspection should be documented. It's the utility inspector's duty to see that the utility carries out its relocation requirements. And that was agreed. If the work and the materials, if it's something like a public utility has a force main, or for instance on the Wakota project, we had a 42-inch force main running right by one of our footings. We actually had to temporarily relocate that thing so we could build one of the footings. And it was an old thing. There was cracks in it, and it was not in the greatest shape. But it took a lot of effort just to build a bypass. But it's a sanitary force main of 42 inches diameter, critical for all of South St. Paul, coming to the Pig's Eye treatment plant. But it's important that we did things right, to not damage the 42-inch pipe, to tap into it as we needed, and then later push it back into the original. So here's a form. There's potentially all kinds of forms now. I would guess Ashton maybe has even something different, but this is one, a daily utility report form. Just what's the labor equipment, what's the progress that was made. But make sure you have something, or maybe even in a daily diary would be adequate. If there's no reimbursement, this says the state really isn't interested in the size of the labor force or the amount of equipment employed. Utilities taking care of it, so we don't have to really track it. And if it's a lump sum, we're also not interested in the specifics of how many people, what was their pay rate, and so on. So delays. The project engineer has to take reasonable steps to see that the utility coordinates so that we don't delay. That happens. We have delays. And make sure we document. If there's delays, make sure you as an inspector document, you as an engineer document it. So that when it comes to the end of the project, we lead battles for, how many working days we have to add and so forth. The contractor can, for their convenience, make changes. They can say, well, rather than working under this power line that has relatively low clearance, I'm going to have them de-energize it while I'm working in the area. Or I'm going to move it, have the utility move it so that I can work more safely. But if it's for their benefit or convenience, the contractor shall pay the cost of those moves. So those are all things that are in the specs that, it makes sense. They bid on it. You can build it with clearance of 30 feet to the power line, but it'd be easier and safer if you relocate it or just decharge it, de-energize it. So you as the inspector should be involved in all kinds of different things, including the pre-construction conference, the permits and agreements, have copies of all of that stuff. And the relocation work is eligible. If it's eligible, don't start until all the agreements are signed. Per 1507, it says the contractor shall contact Gopher State 1 call at least 48 hours before starting their operations. So, we don't want the contractor to try to delay the things that are going on. 1507.2, page 42 of the spec book, the notifications and things that are required by the contractor. And if they discover something that presence was not previously known, they shall immediately notify the owner. So, kind of mentioned this before, if work is near an electrical power line, contractor may elect to work with lines energized or at no expense to the department may temporarily shut off, insulate, or bypass the area or make other arrangements. So again, those are at the contractor's the cost, but like I say, work area. So a question on our plans here. What utilities are to be built on our bridge 27138? And where might we find that information? Who has a thought? Who sees anything?
I see you.
You see electrical, huh? Yeah, you remember seeing the electrical. Okay, so there's some electrical in there somewhere. Conduit. With some drainage, maybe? Drainage system. D910, we'll talk about that a little bit. How about the pay item list on 1A? At the bottom. The conduit system type 1 and 2, page 1A. So we see some things. So conduit system type 1, conduit system type 2. Where do you find details for hanging the conduit under the deck? Page 35 had that little detail and it showed the little anchorages and so conduit support assembly, kind of in the upper right sheet. She's 35. So we see that there are some things that are going on. How about on the north abutment? Is there any utilities that are to be built on that abutment? So as we're constructing the abutment, is there anything we need to build? So north abutment. So specifically, can you find any conduits for lighting and where do they get placed? And also, how about any access through the back wall? And we got a page we're starting to see. 16. So what do we see in there? Anyone can describe, or maybe some notes or something.
Note 4.
Note 4, centerline 6-inch conduit sleeve for future use. To be capped. Where is that? There's one right in the middle. See going vertical, is that the one you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
So down in the elevation, be right in the middle, right near one of the construction joints.
And it's down with me, it's open, going through
And it goes through horizontally right above the footing. Okay, so we're seeing some things in there. So there's note 4, there's also a note 6, centerline opening for 2-inch diameter conduit signals. So we'll highlight some things that are in there. So I think we've kind of identified some of them. There's note, this note 6, I think, is giving a dimension to this pipe. So it's going through a back wall. So as we're building the back wall, we want to make sure that we put that in there. The abutment is built way before any of the conduits are installed. And so if we don't put that in, we're going to have to core it through. And that has happened on St. Croix. We had an end diaphragm, probably 3 foot thick, and they forgot a utility conduit, and they had to core through. So, that took a better part of a day probably to core through that. Okay, then we have this little one that's coming down vertically, and it's going across horizontally. It's capped, but this would be for lighting. That put some underdeck lighting in that zone as well as.
Or I can finish it off.
Okay, so that means, we do have conduits, and I think we will show that B910 piece down here as well. Power lines, look up and be safe. This is a signal, temporary, and this is actually right near that I was talking about, the 42-inch sanitary. It was this pier that the force main was running pretty close to it. But this is on the Lakota project. A lot of times we might have some type of overhead sign on a bridge, or we might have bigger overhead lights or something. So this is a pretty big pull template. But if we have something like that, we want a template just to make sure things stay in the correct orientation. So there's anchorage cast into the railing. So this is similar to our 6-inch future on our plan. So much bigger. Here's a water line going across the bridge. I haven't seen many of those recently, but I have seen some of the old bridges with water lines.
So I started until you get to the calculation.
This was one on the Gold Line project. It's a bus rapid transit from downtown St. Paul to Woodbury. There was a bridge here that they needed to raise, and the plans adequately showed how they could do it. The contractor that came along and said, can we modify our details? So I won't be able to read all of this, but in essence, the plan details showed that we need to maintain whatever that vertical clearance was. This submittal said,
but that's
temporarily, or actually this plan said temporarily hoist the conduits to higher elevation to provide room for installation of temporary support beam. And so that is something that was required. The contractor said, well, do I really need to do that? And so that, it was going to be a several week process, maybe even 3 months or something. And so MnDOT said, no, absolutely not. We're not going to restrict the clearance on the 694. 694 is under to make that work. So be aware of the notes that you have. This is that bridge. And so supporting that utility bank, it's going to later be hung underneath the deck of this bridge. But we see how it actually, you can kind of see how it goes up so that the support beams could be installed. So ultimately, they didn't like the plan, but they were trying to ask if we do it some other way. Sometimes there's temporary supports needed here for utilities as we're redecking or something like that. Services sometimes need to be maintained. Some older pictures here of some of that. Anytime we have conduits, we want to make sure that there is expansion devices that are there. If you don't provide adequate expansion, this is what can happen. You'll start to separate your conduits. Just be aware of that, and especially some of the difference in materials. So a lot of times the contractors now would want to use the fiberglass type of conduits, but it does have a different coefficient of expansion and it'll shrink more than the concrete, so it could have some issues. Here's a conduit system running in the barrier. This is very common, and these are called expansion deflection fittings. They might have a better picture as well, but part of the reason, so it's expansion to provide when the bridge moves laterally, but it's also deflection, that if we ever want to jack this bridge deck and replace the bearings or do something, it can also accommodate the movement vertically. Oftentimes there's drainage that's shown. I think our plans show some details for that. Yeah, here's a better picture of what that expansion deflection fitting looks like. So here they're ready to cast the barrier. There's a conduit. There's actually 2 banks of conduit, one in the bottom of the barrier, one further up, and each of them will have an expansion deflection fitting. So quite common. We also, so there's a need to ground things, so there's ground straps that go across. Here is a picture of the utility conduits going through an abutment back wall. And so, again, form that in. If you don't, you're going to have to core. And so that's something that we have. There's a hanger system in the deck, so similar to our plan sheet 35. That's what how it would look in real life. Lighting system. This is the bridge that Melissa was showing right near the 35W Mississippi River Bridge. But a lot of times we will have lighting to help, especially these wider bridges. It helps give a safer feel at night. Just sometimes there's conduits in the deck, whether it's for some of these traffic sensors or things like that. Lightning protection. So on St. Croix, we had to put this, it's a pretty big cable. It was attached to the drilled shafts or the caissons that are like 20 feet below the water here. And every pour that went up. So if we would pour 15 feet, that cable would go up. And we had to remember it every time because it's all part of the lightning protection system that's up on the top. And so obviously if you forget that down at the bottom, well, now what you're going to do? Now your whole lightning protection is missing.
That have to be one continuous piece.
They spliced it a couple of times, but yeah, it was pretty long. I know that when they started it. But there was, I think they just used some type of coupler.
Okay.
But yeah, because it's, well, the tallest tower was
The large one.
220 feet above the water. Lighting on the bridge, so aesthetic lighting is something that is also, make sure that we have provisions for wherever the lights are going to be, we need continuity. So that's just a little bit on utilities. Again, kind of a minor topic, but any questions? Let's take a 15-minute break, so 5 after we'll reconvene.
Can you see me out here? I'm like, no.
City proposal, he wants to yeah, I guess I'll be trying to be very
Sounds like since the semester started yesterday, I'm like,
So I wonder what the object has to done.
because not all,
I don't know why.
not my classes, depends on the professor. Some of them are religious at your homework, so it's Monday, everybody goes on Monday. Some of them are doing Thursdays, and Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays. I'm not, and then
How is it? Is there any part of you to go to this whole That's the one.
oh, I left, so there's some parts of it, they're like,
So you
one
get
thing they get to do. Beginning of program.
I was doing like
And when they call it,
the winter. I got my six pack. Stock up my fridge.
Well, yeah, that's why I said, that we, the seminar, it was an online only class, so I'm like, I'm not driving 5.5 hours to,
Yeah. You don't want to have one with your fellow classmates. Drive all the way down here for one
one is a speech class. Well, not even that, so last year, or last year, I had a class where we do mock interviews.
Yeah.
So you mock interviews, so you have to like, they should give you this list, you have to prep it and whatever, and give it like, they teams interviews. Well, many of them I set up and nobody ever showed up for their team interview. Like, so I'm getting lesser of a grade because they don't show up.
Yeah, that's not fair.
So I am the professor, I'm like, I have limited time when I can do this. I'm like, and I screenshot the emails of like, oh, the reading gonna be at their time, and then happen, whatever. She's like, I just remember, she goes, just have your supervisor sign off on it. She's great. So I did one. She's like, Jeremy said to do a couple things for me. I'm like, hey. Like, so there was job fairs that were working. I'm like, they were over there.
Finally, homemade manjaro makes your pants drop in just one minute. I've developed
We had like 5
Oh, we went back and
She's like, just should, basically proof of like that you're in the industry.
Yeah.
So did you hear out a letter?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying the same thing about the resume, she's like, you only do, you know, one page or whatever, I'm like, really, I'm gonna do one page of a resume. She's like, well, you know, whatever, I'm like, years of experience in the field, I've only worked at one place. I'm like, I can't really see.
Yeah.
What do you want me to do here? She's like, oh, you can have more than one page. I'm like, yeah, I was there. You know, the non-field related stuff in there.
Screw the game.
I've only rebuilt one.
You're gonna take team this one?
I'll do the first part. I mean, it wasn't that hard. Mind you, nothing was broken either. We just.
He's gonna do it.
No, after.
After.
So.
That's what I was thinking.
Or the newer one's harder to work on.
Usually, it would be terrible.
Kyle back. Yeah. Did you address that?
Burying a barrier and go over the railroad.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they.
I did, because it was the first car that I get, because that was just slowing down.
Doesn't go very far.
That's not.